verdict is still out, the governor, state workers, and taxpayers alike are holding their breath to see if the state's second attempt at a concessions agreement goes through. Meanwhile, there is movement on the Connecticut sports scene, and not all of it is good. We'll look at some of the off-the-field economics and politics being played out. Hi, this is The Real Story. I'm Lori Perez. More state workers have pink slips. Some are already out of their jobs now as union members consider a clarified savings and concessions deal from the state. If ratified, it'll save the state money, which will, of course, save thousands of state jobs and prevent some of the sweeping cuts in services that are pending. This is the second go-around with some new clarity and new bylaws that are supposed to make approval easier. We're going to speak with both sides of the deal today. We spoke earlier with Governor Malloy's spokeswoman, Colleen Flanagan. Thanks, Colleen, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I guess the first question would be, wasn't this supposed to be easier with the Democratic governor? I know there was a lot made at the beginning of this that, Roy Grosso and Marco Jakian, that all the players on both sides from the union and the administration knew each other and had worked together for a long time, and that might lend some familiarity and some ease to this process. Has it and we just don't know it, or?
I think the tenor with which these relationships are ongoing and these discussions are ongoing, and this agreement, now we're on the second stage of the tentative agreement, it could have been a lot worse in terms of the tenor of the conversations that got us here. I think the relationships that Marco Jakian and some labor leaders had were helpful, and I think that they continue to be. I think that's why we were able to clarify the language in the second agreement, make it clear to the state employee members of the unions what exactly we were trying to do.
How much different is it really for the lay people who are not involved in it day to day?
It is no different. It is clarified. The original agreement, people were concerned that their health care plan was going to be turned over into a sustenance model. That was never the case. It will never be the case. And that was really clarified. There's also some money that needs to be recouped because we were after the beginning of the fiscal year. But beyond those two provisions, nothing else was changed. It's just clarified.
So is that why it took a couple days to get it done? Because I think some people were saying, well, if it's just going to be clarified, why are day after day going on?
The devil's in the details, and I think we always hope to move this along a little bit faster. People are receiving layoff notices daily, and people are really beginning to see the impact that these cuts are going to have on their lives. So we would want it to happen as quickly as possible, but things being what they are, it happened relatively quickly. Now it's on to the unions to vote on this, and hopefully we'll have a ratified agreement.
And so for people who are shaking their heads saying, we're done with this, there are going to be layoffs, and then there weren't going to be layoffs, maybe there's not going to be layoffs, just be patient, or?
I would say that we, the administration, the governor, lieutenant governor, are hopeful that an agreement can be ratified, but we're proceeding as though there won't be, because we have to. There's a $1.6 billion budget deficit if this agreement is not ratified, and it's up to the governor to make sure that our budget is balanced.
So on the other hand, why can't we just hold off, though? Why can't we hold off on the layoffs and the cuts? Because we've already named what they're going to be. So why not just hold off until we have a decision, and that way people won't lose their jobs and offices won't be closed?
We're about a month into the new fiscal year. So the notices that went out 2 or 3 weeks ago are just going into effect now, which means that certain employees have 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, in some cases even a year provision in their contract before they can legally be let go. We need to be in a place where very soon after August 31st, which is sort of the deadline, one way or another, we either have an agreement or we don't, that we can make sure that our state's budget is balanced one way or another.
But what's the cost of laying someone off and then bringing them back versus just holding? Is there an actual dollar figure?
At this point, there are relatively few state employees who have actually been separated from the workforce. The layoff notices just started going back out about 2.5 weeks ago, so we still have 2 or 3 weeks until a large number of state employees are let go, literally off of the payrolls. And like I said, we hope that this is ratified sooner rather than later, but the deadlines or the dates by which each union votes are not up to us. The governor obviously hopes that it happens quickly, but it's up to each individual union.
Yeah, we talked about this a little before the show, and I was saying, well, can't, a lot of questions that we get from email and all that are people saying, well, can't the governor just tell them, listen, you got to do it tomorrow? I mean, we're not fooling around anymore. Everybody's costing us money, and do it now.
I think if he could do that, he would, but it's not up to him to set the date by which the unions actually specifically vote. In the legislation that was passed a few weeks ago, August 31st was the deadline by which we either had a ratified agreement or we didn't. But between now and then, it's really up to the individual bargaining units and unions to decide when they're going to vote.
So to be clear, if someone were to be separated from their job and then this got ratified and they got called back, so they would be guaranteed an equal position? Because there was some question the other day that they might not have the same location.
Sure. I think that the best way to look at where we are right now and where we could be going are two scenarios. And there are a number of iterations in both scenarios, but they're more or less one of two scenarios. We ratify the agreement and the vast majority of layoffs and terribly painful programmatic and spending cuts are rolled back. Or we don't ratify the agreement and those layoffs and programmatic cuts go forward. Like I said, there's iterations involved in sort of where people go, but the governor's been very clear that if this agreement is ratified, the vast majority of state employees will have their jobs. He's, obviously said a number of times over the past couple of months that he wants to thin out the ranks of managers, and obviously some employees will be impacted by the consolidations that he's put forward, but the vast majority of those people who have received layoff notices will receive their jobs back.
Now, he hasn't wanted to say definitively, but there's some question about whether that would apply to people who rejected the two-year wage freeze. What's the best way for us to look at that at this point?
I think that, like I said before, I think the best way to look at it is the vast majority of those people who receive layoff notices, if the agreement is ratified, will receive their job back. Beyond that, in terms of the specifics, it's just too early to say.
What about the programmatic cuts? Because not all of them will be rescinded. I mean, and lots of them were not even predicated by the lack of ratification, right? So talk about some of those that might remain, because I think some people are confused about what came because of the deal and what came not.
To be sure, there's a lot of confusion, and I think this time around everyone is taking extra care to make sure everything is upfront and people have their questions clarified in the beginning and not the end. But for example, the governor tasked the commissioners to find every nook and cranny to find savings, and they did. For example, the Department of Administrative Services, which is the agency that owns a number of buildings for different state agencies and boards and commissions, they found $1.5 million in savings by doing things like reducing security personnel at low security buildings, taking their cleaning services down from maybe 3 times a week to 2 times a week, or closing the building, instead of having it open 14 hours, having it open 13 hours. That's $1.5 million that likely will stay in effect because it's just smarter.
What kind of a toll is this taking on the staff? I guess you guys are working overtime. Obviously, maybe some disappointment that the first deal didn't go through.
I think, I think the entire administration is disappointed the first agreement didn't go through, but I think there's also a cautiously optimistic feeling in the office and in the administration. And look, nobody wants to see these cuts. They are painful. They impact everybody who goes to the DMV. They impact people whose children play sports at VOTEC schools. I mean, across the board, these are painful cuts that no one wants to see happen. There's a reality that we have to balance the budget, and we'll do it. But certainly there's a way that the governor wants to do it, which is the ratification, versus the way he is going to have to do it if it doesn't happen.
And even if it does happen, we're still tightening our belts, right?
Absolutely. Each agency and commissioner was brought on in the Malloy administration for those folks who were new and for those people who weren't, being charged to do more with less. And that's happening in the governor's office as well. We have a reduced staff level. It's difficult, but everybody has to do it, and there's really no other way around it.
All right. Well, we will be standing by, and we wish you good luck. Thanks a lot, Colleen,
for
being here. Thanks again to Colleen Flanagan, Governor Malloy's spokeswoman, for trying to help us get a grasp on things. Coming up, The View from the other side of the table. We're going to talk to union members about the push to get a deal done.